What happened to the Egyptian New Kingdom? And what was Egypt's hegemony like in its final days? Find out on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. On this channel, we talk a lot about the Exodus as having occurred around 1263 BC. And a common objection to the Exodus is that the Israelites left Egypt to enter a land where the Egyptian Empire ruled with an iron fist. Today, we are going to talk about what happened to Egypt immediately following the 18th dynasty. Now, first, a little bit of background. At the beginning of Dynasty 18, Egypt had taken a generally isolationist stance following the expulsion of the Hyksos. The Ketem fortresses that existed on the Sinai were renovated, and Semitic Asiatics were generally prevented from entering Egypt. Even the entry of trade goods from Canaan was restricted. Now, about 60 years after the conquest of Avaris, we have the death of Thutmose II, which caused a minor succession crisis, and that crisis allowed Queen Hatshepsut to usurp the throne. Thutmose III, the rightful heir to Egypt's throne, was sent off to join the army, where Hatshepsut hoped he would meet with a happy accident. However, Thutmose III proved to be an excellent and well-liked soldier, and when he assumed the throne independently after his stepmother's death, he found he liked campaigning a lot more than the vagaries of court life. In fact, he liked campaigning so much that he conquered Nubia and the Levant all the way up to Kadesh on the Orontes. As he conquered, he established towns that would collect tribute and act as monitoring stations for the Egyptians. Thutmose III established the Egyptian hegemony over the surrounding territories that brought newfound wealth into Egypt that had the added benefit of driving down prices at home. This was the beginning of Egypt's Golden Age, which would persist through to the middle of the 19th dynasty. Now, the Egyptian New Kingdom consists of three dynasties: the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties. After a succession crisis at the end of Dynasty 18, which resulted in a 50-year war with the Hittites, the Ramesside kings of the 19th dynasty took control. And the beginning of the Dynasty 19 started off quite promising. Seti I managed to reverse some of the defeats that had been sustained under Horemheb, and internal problems with the Hittites presented an opportunity to drive them out of the Levant. In 1288 BC, Ramesses II took the throne, and he was a tremendous builder, but he also had a particular hatred for the Theban priesthood. So, he moved the capital from Thebes to a new site at what became the city of Ramses. However, he could not rule without the priest's assent, so he immediately began building temples at Abydos, Karnak, and Luxor. Now, Ramses II's first military conflict was against the Hittites in his 5th regnal year. He was trying to retake some of the territory back from the Hittites that had been originally conquered by Thutmose III and lost under the kings that came after King Tutankhamun. And while the battle at Kadesh was a draw, he had enough small successes that he could redefine it as a victory. However, Ramses II's first true victory was one of diplomacy. In his 18th year, he fought his last campaign in Levant, and a few years later agreed to a treaty with the Hittites that brought the 50-year-old war to an end. He had re-secured Egyptian hegemony over the Levant through diplomacy, something his predecessor, Amenhotep III, had done with great success. This should have been the crowning achievement for Ramses II. However, some things were already going south, and he wasn't even aware that it was happening. By the 5th regnal year, some of the Sea Peoples tribes had already invaded and established a presence in the coastal plain of Canaan right under his nose. And the 25th regnal year of Ramses II was not a good year for Egypt, even if the Exodus had never happened. This was the year things started to go wrong for Egypt. It was the year the crown prince Amenhotep died. Now, the importance of this is Amenhotep had already assumed much of the responsibilities of government. He was not only crown prince, but also chief diplomat of Egypt. This was also the year that the vizier Passer died, as well as around this same time, the city of Avaris was abandoned by the Semitic Asiatic population that lived there. The Egyptians depended upon this forced labor for the manufacture of mud bricks, which were used as building materials to create storage silos and palatial estates. The remainder of Ramses II's reign is somewhat of a mystery. Little is known about the internal affairs of Egypt during the remaining 41 years of Ramses II's reign. The monuments that were built after 1263 BC reminisced over the events that occurred in the first decade of the king's life. A series of letters were exchanged between the Hittite and Egyptian courts, but unfortunately, those letters tell us little of what was going on inside of Egypt. After reigning 66 years, Ramses II died, and his 13th son, Merneptah, took the throne. Merneptah did not expect to take the throne, being so far down the line of succession. So he was trained to become a charioteer and rose to the rank of general. He was already in his 60s when he took the throne, and he inherited a kingdom with problems. Sometime in the first 4 years of his reign, he had a problem in Canaan to deal with. The hegemony built by Thutmose III and re-established through treaty by Ramses II was falling apart. The king of Gezer rebelled against Egypt and started to conquer other nearby city-states. Merneptah led a punitive campaign against Gezer, and it is during this campaign that he encounters the Israelites, which he chronicles on the Merneptah Victory Stela. However, Merneptah's campaign appears to be rather focused upon the problem at hand. He did not venture into Judean foothills like other Egyptians' campaigns did. The reasons for this are largely unknown. However, most likely it was caused by the lack of charioteers among his forces. This lack of charioteers would bite Merneptah again in his 5th regnal year, when Egypt is invaded by a coalition of Libyan tribes. That invasion came off of the western desert and managed to reach the walls of Heliopolis in the heart of Egypt. It took 3 months for Merneptah to oust the Libyans, which shows that Egypt was in a compromised military state at the time. However, despite Merneptah's skill as a general, systemic problems in the military persisted. When he died after a short 10-year reign, his successor and crown prince Seti II tried to inherit the throne, but Seti II was usurped by Ramesses. Now, Seti II escaped with his life, but lacked the loyal troops to take back the throne. This started a 3-year civil war, which finally ended with Seti II defeating Ramesses. Seti II reigned for a further 6 years, but that reign was pretty much unremarkable. Seti II's successor was Siptah, who came to the throne around age 9, and ruled for at most 7 years. He also had a deformed left foot. He was a young, fragile, and ineffective ruler who was manipulated by courtiers such as the Vizier Bey and his regent Queen Tuwasret. The final ruler of Dynasty 19 was Queen Tuwasret, who was the daughter of Merneptah, wife of Seti II, and also was regent for King Siptah. She reigned independently for 2 years, and her reign ended in a civil war against Seth-Nakht, the first king of Dynasty 20. So that ends Dynasty 19. The first ruler of Dynasty 20 was Seth-Nakht. He ruled 3 years following the civil war, and spent much of his time legitimizing his rule since he was a commoner. The second ruler of Dynasty 20 was Ramesses III, and like his namesake, was an incredible builder. He began his career well by defeating 2 invasions of the Sea Peoples. Now, it is important to remember that many of these tribes are the same people that established themselves in Canaan from the time of Ramses II, and no one up to this point had done anything about them. And despite his problems with the Sea Peoples, Ramses III managed to do a couple of successful campaigns of the coastal plain of Canaan and into Syria. However, his reign ended badly. The last days of his reign were plagued with financial instability and inflation. And for some unknown reason, he no longer campaigned to increase the supply of goods. Things had gotten so bad that he was finally assassinated by a minor prince, Pentawere. Now, Pentawere also tried to assassinate the crown prince, Ramses IV. But Ramses IV escaped and returned with his army to depose Pentawere and secure the throne. Nevertheless, by the time of Ramses IV, Egypt had already lost all its hegemonic holdings, both in Levant and Nubia. Inflation was spiraling out of control, and Egypt looked in upon itself. This was effectively the end of New Kingdom regional control. And while there would be kings that would come after Ramses IV, none of them were strong enough to loot their former hegemonic holdings until Shoshank I, the first king of Dynasty 22, the second dynasty of the third intermediate period. But that campaign only represented a shadow of Egypt during its golden age. So, anyway, that summarizes the end of Egypt's New Kingdom hegemony. We hope you found that interesting and learned something. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.